Good evening, everyone. We want to welcome you to our webinar in which we're going to discuss the topic of sexual harassment and specifically in the workplace. Tonight we have three special guests. So our first guest is Professor of Sexual Education, Ritah Hebbassi. She has been a professor for the last 10 years, and she has a lot of knowledge about this topic, and she will gladly share it with you. Our second guest is Zakia Moufid. Zakia Moufid is a psychiatrist, and she's been in this profession for the last 12 years. Our third and final guest is Hala Cherkaoui. Hala Cherkaoui is a journalist, and she has studied a lot of cases of sexual harassment in the workplace, and she will be sharing with us the most common types of sexual harassment in the workplace. We'll be starting first with our first guest, Ritah Hebbassi.
So hello everybody, and first of all, thank you so much for tuning in with us on this important topic. Sexual harassment is already a very sensitive topic, and especially when we're talking about it in the context of the workplace. So a touch on the knee, a lash of his glance, a crude comment made by a colleague, or also an inappropriate suggestion. Most people have witnessed or experienced inappropriate sexual comments or actions at work that has made them uncomfortable. And so, however, way too often, there is always some sort of careless comment that can be thrown or a gesture that can turn into something more. And when it turns into something more, that is when it crosses the lines of sexual harassment. Unfortunately, there is this concept called the culture of silence, and unfortunately it surrounds the topic of sexual harassment, especially in the workplace, because however, the more that we talk about what happened and reporting it is also the only way to change the culture where we live in, where everybody feels safe and respected. So just a little bit more on a brief summary of the types of sexual harassment that can occur in the workplace to better identify them. So the following descriptions, while not all inclusive, can help you understand the type of behaviors that can be considered conduct of sexual nature, and that if they are unwelcome may constitute to sexual harassment. So there are three main categories. So first of all, there's the unwanted sexual statements. So, for example, sexual or dirty jokes, comments on the physical attributes of a person or a coworker, spreading rumors about somebody, or ratting others as to their sexual activity or performances or preferences. All of this constitutes unwanted sexual statements, and these statements can be made either in person, in writing, electronically, for example, email, instant messaging, blogs, web pages, etc. There are many ways that unwanted sexual statements can be presented. So the second one would be the unwanted personal attention. So, for example, letters, telephone calls, visits, pressure for sexual favors, pressure for unnecessary personal interactions, or pressures for dates where a sexual or romantic intent appears evident but still remains unwanted. And finally, there is the unwanted physical or sexual advances, such as touching, hugging, kissing, fondling, maybe touching oneself sexually for others to view, or sexual assault, intercourse, or other sexual activities. Now, the conduct of the harasser must either be severe or pervasive to be classified as sexual harassment. So although a single unwanted request for a date or one sexually suggestive comment might offend the person and or actually be considered inappropriate, it may not completely classify as sexual harassment. However, and this is very important, a number of relatively minor separate incidents may add up to sexual harassment if the incidents affect your work environment. So if the incidents are repeated more than a couple times, and it actually becomes distracting and a burden for you to work, it can be considered as sexual harassment. And so with all of the confusion that's of course surrounding what's okay and what isn't in terms of workplace behavior, the biggest question that one asks themselves is, how do you know when you're being harassed? And the best way that throughout the years, I, as a teacher, I have understood how to kind of identify, and it always comes back to how you feel, how the person actually feels. So for example, an off-color joke that might offend you might be unwelcome and disrespectful, but it probably isn't unlawful. However, if a person's behavior is sexual in nature and it makes you feel uncomfortable on a constant basis, it probably is and can be considered as sexual harassment. For example, it might include standing too close, maybe just slipping an arm around the waist, or for example, a request to meet alone after work, or it can go as far as threats of reprisal if you don't show up, or for example, repeatedly talking about their sexual experiences with you or asking about your own sexual experiences. And these are only a few examples that illustrate what sexual harassment can look like. However, there are many, many, many other forms that it can take. And another way to tell that you're being harassed is that the behavior does not stop, even after you've let the perpetrator know that they're making you uncomfortable and that you are not okay with their behavior. And again, I cannot repeat it enough. Always go by how you feel. If you start to experience dread when you know the person will be in, you will be in the presence of someone who frequently makes sexual advances or overtures, you are probably being harassed, and it is that is something to talk to. And I hope that everything that I have said will help you identify the sorts of sexual harassments that can happen. And if you feel sexually harassed, always report it. And it is one of the biggest points of our presentation today. And thank you.
So thank you, Ritah, for your participation and your time. I'm sure that our viewers would find your given information very useful. So moving on to our next guest speaker, Hala Cherkaoui. As I said earlier, she's a journalist, and she would like to share with us the types of sexual harassment that occurred the most within the workplace. So Hala Cherkaoui.
Thank you, Yassine. Everyone. So today I'll be talking about the different types of sexual harassment. So I'll start by the first common one, which is the gender harassment, and it refers to the crude sexual, verbal, and non-verbal behaviors conveying insulting, hostile, and degrading attitudes about one's gender, gender identity, or sexual orientation, obscene sexual gestures, flashing, displaying sexual images or objects at work, and emailing or texting sexual images to a peer or co-worker are all forms of gender harassment. Sexist or heterosexist language, jokes, or comments also fall under this heading. Moving to the second second type, which is the unwanted sexual harassment, and it includes making suggestive or positive and negative comments about a person's body, leering and catcalling, spreading sexual rumors about a person, and electronically sharing sexualized images of the person. Unwanted sexual harassment is also you can see also unwanted sexual touching, such as grabbing, pinching, groping, intentionally brushing up against another in a sexual way is also considered as unwanted sexual harassment. This is also true of blocking another's path or unwelcome sexual advances, such as repeated requests for a kiss, a date, or sex, and attempted or completed rape. Moving now to the third and the last one, which is the sexual coercion, and it's known legally as a quid pro quo sh. It refers to requiring sexual contact or sexual favors as a condition of receiving favors, or as a condition words of or benefits such as employment, promotion, favorable work conditions, assistance, or good performance evaluation or grade. Although sexual coercion appears to be the most serious and least common form of ASH, less intense but more frequent forms of ASH may create ongoing stress to well-being. So here were the three main types of sexual harassment that anyone can face in the workplace. Hope it was useful for you.
Okay, thank you, Hala Cherkaoui, for giving us the types. I'm sure this will certainly help our viewers be able to recognize sexual harassment. So we're moving on to our last speaker, and Zakia Moufid. She is a psychiatrist, as I said first, and she will be presenting the topic from health side, from studies. So Zakia Moufid.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you again for attending our webinar. So, sexual harassment occurs when people are targets of unwanted sexual comments, sexual gestures, or sexual acts because of their actual or perceived gender expression, or sexual orientation. Due to its frequency and harmful effects on people and organization, and because it is often a symptom of social inequalities, and by using psychological theory and research, as well as intersectional and contextual lenses, sexual harassment is actually, and of course, is of concern to us psychologists. So, from a psychological perspective, sexual harassment matters because it frequently causes pain and suffering. Victims or targets perceive sexual harassment as annoying, offensive, humiliating, and frightening. Sexual harassment denies and disempowers its target, and physical stress occur, and stress related to both mental and physical risks, including traumatic disorder, of course, may result. So it's also a factor to weight shape concerns, negative body images, and disordered eating, and can reduce target's sense of security and safety. Indeed, sexual harassment can also deliberately or unintentionally interfere with performance and career aspiration by creating an intimidating, hostile, abusive, and offensive environment that erodes the targets by creating maybe quite difficulties in their confidence and makes it harder to achieve whatever they want to achieve. Concern about sexual harassment is consistent with the social justice goals of psychology, as it is often symptom and a cause of gender and other social inequalities, I said before. From a social cultural gender perspective, sexual harassment is a consequence of gender role socialization processes that produce male dominance, the sexual objectification of women. By this, I mean that men's beliefs and expectations about masculinity are powerful and consistent predictors of sexual violence, supporting beliefs and behaviors. Masculinity norms, including power over women, dominance, and sexual conquest, may drive sexual harassment. The influence of these norms intensifies in male groups when men may sexually harass to demonstrate their masculinity, because men tend to interpret friendly behavior as reflecting sexual interest, and women tend to interpret sexually interest behavior as man friendliness. There is much more than misunderstanding. A woman who has no interest in a sexual relationship with a man may first act in a friendly way, in friendly fashion, which the man may interpret as a signal of sexual interest and respond with what he believes are mild indications of sexual interest. So if the woman takes the man's sexual interest to be more friendliness, she may respond with more friendliness, which the man may view as a positive response to his display first of sexual interest, thereby promoting him to respond with sexual advance. So just to sum up a more probably solution in the workplace for the sexual harassment, I'll be brief. So as we know, sexual harassment is very expensive. At the very least, it causes low moral or consequently decreases productivity. Angry, fearful, humiliated people are incapable of performing well. If not addressed, sexual harassment may result in expensive lawsuits, dreadful publicity for the institution, and the destruction of a whole organization image that took years to be built, of course. Although sexual harassment is illegal, its elimination, unfortunately, will come through the organization itself and the individuals, of course, commitments and being able to talk about it, not the courts. Most individuals, men and women, want a safe and secure workplace, free from any intimidation and fear. So, three approaches, according to our psychological studies, can be implied in the workplace. The first one, a broad anti-harassment positive environment policy that includes a statement specifically addressing each individual about the sexual harassment. The second one, a separate sexual harassment policy which covers all the institution members, each one. The third one, and the last but not least, separate sexual harassment policies, one that addresses non-management employees and one that addresses the management. So yes, we have these three approaches, but it can never happen as it is supposed to be if there is no communication within the organization. So the best policy against sexual harassment is useless if there is no communication effectively, even if the organization already has a well-written policy. It's important to publicize this more often. The best strategy is to use all of the following methods in various times throughout the year. For example, memos. When implementing a new sexual harassment policy, disseminated throughout the organization, accompanied by an appropriate memo emphasizing its important, maybe a very adequate and crucial idea. Also meetings, for example, when there is a new employee or I don't know, a new investor for new employees, both no management and no management orientation should cover the organization human resources policies and problems, including, of course, sexual harassment policies. So managers should each time review and discuss the organization policy concerning the topic. And of course, no employee at any level should be able to claim ignorance of a policy as an excuse for inappropriate behavior. After all, it's a matter of also humanity. So I hope this was quite helpful and interesting for you, our viewers, and all I can say, make your voice heard. If there is anything wrong, you have the total right to do so. So yes, thank you again, Yassine.
Yeah, yes, thank you, Zakia, for what you just added. I think this issue needs contribution, needs for people like us to come together and give our opinions and ways to help people in our communities to know how to deal with these problems. So our guests gave their word about the topic, and I would like to add something about it. So I would like to talk more about the balance of power in the workplace that has changed dramatically in the past several decades. This change, of course, continues to accelerate. The struggle for power and position seems endless, while sexual harassment is one result of this struggle, as the list of high-profile men accused of sexual harassment or assault is growing, and because of it, there's this cultural shift demanding increased accountability for workplace sexual harassment. But behind closed doors, many companies and institutions have done little to address sexual harassment, which has contributed to hostile work environment, not only for victims of this act, but also for other employees who are merely bystanders. So this subject of sexual harassment often excites controversy, of course, so that's why we're here, in part because it can be viewed through a variety of lenses. Some see sexual harassment as a tool of patriarchy, while others view it as mostly harmless form of interaction. Well, the difficulty is that the label has been applied to such a diversity of conduct that its meaning has substantially changed. Courts have declared that all of the following kinds of conduct may constitute sexual harassment. For example, like our journalist Hala said, forcible rape, extorting sex for job benefits, sexual or romantic uh, overtures, sexual jokes, etc. So to conclude our topic, there's greater public awareness nowadays of sexual harassment, and we can see that there's more proactive involvement by companies and other institutions. This will hopefully reduce the prevalence of sexual harassment and the devastation it causes within our society and community. So with all of this said, I would like to thank our guest speakers, and it's time for our viewers to ask us questions, and we would be happy to answer them. I've One of you has already asked a question. So Anis Louisi is asking, what are the solutions that can be provided for this crucial act? So if any of our guest speakers would like to answer, yes, Ritah.
Thank you very much for this question. It is a very important part of our presentation, because not only do we want to show you what sexual harassment looks like, we also want to help you prevent it. So the most effective weapon against sexual harassment, of course, is prevention. So harassment does not disappear on its own. And in fact, it is actually more likely that when the problem is not addressed, then the harassment will worsen and become more difficult to remedy as time goes. So first of all, there are many ways that can lead to prevention of sexual harassment. So first of all, the employer needs to know that they have responsibilities and that they are liable for sexual harassment committed by an employee. So that is, first of all, knowledge of it has to be there. And then there are, of course, anti-harassment policies that can explain what harassment is and that tells all employees that harassment will not be tolerated. And these anti-harassment policies should also, of course, set forth a detailed mechanism by which employees can make complaints when sexual harassment occurs. And of course, there are other things such as anti-harassment training for all of the staff, of course, that assess in preventing harassment and support individuals who are being harassed to come forward and ensure that the problem is addressed quickly and effectively. But of course, the biggest weapon that people have against sexual harassment is knowledge of it. Is you have to know what sexual harassment looks like. You have to know how to identify it, and you have to know that, and you have to have courage, because even though it might be scary to report something like sexual harassment, and especially in the workplace, it might come from a place that is above your own, but it is not something that you cannot talk about. So of course it's knowledge of it, and not give knowledge to the people that are working in the place of that there are solutions to it. It's not like nobody's doing anything. There are ways to prevent it. There are places that you can go to complain, especially, for example, in the HR department. So I hope, to our viewer that asked this question, I hope it was useful for you. Thank you.
So thank you, Ritah, for your answer. So I can see that our viewers are interacting in the comments, and one of them, Nabil, said that he thinks that society should combat this problem. And from this statement, I would like to ask our guests if you think that our society is doing enough, or is even our Moroccan society talking about this subject, or even trying to educate people about it. So what do you guys think? Well, which one of you, of course, would like to answer this question? Yes.
So, lately, society sexual harassment is, of course, had been a crucial problem in our not only society but also our culture as Moroccans. But unfortunately, there I would say there is not much is done to try to fix the problem, because as we said, yes, and it's a matter of education and a matter of environment, which so it's really important for the youth or adults as anyone to be sure about the importance of talking about it, and it's fine to do so, and there will always be someone, and by someone I mean maybe your family, maybe your association, that can help you within your such sexual harassment. After all, no one has to deal with it on its own, and so yes, thank you.
So thank you, Zakia. So I think there's one more question, and it's about how can civil education change how this issue is perceived by people. And sexual education is not a person in our country. So if you'd like to talk about the effect and the impact of sexual education on people.
I think our host is a little frozen. I think it might be a problem of connection. But I will take back what he was saying. So we had a comment from somebody well, first of all, we have a comment that said, could we have some solutions on the issue? And thank you again for the question. And like I said, there are many ways to prevent it, such as, but it's just a summary. It's always, 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 it's the knowledge of it. The knowledge is your most important weapon. Your courage also is your most important weapon, and it is the only way that you can battle this fight that we constantly fight, that is sexual harassment. I think for, if my teammate Hala agrees, I think we are done for this subject. I hope everybody was happy with the answers and the ideas that we brought in front. And if we did not answer any of the questions, please leave another comment below. We will be more than happy to answer them one more time. And I think that's about it. Thank you very much, everybody, for tuning in, and have a good night.